ground, who's at the end of the table. And I just want to introduce very briefly, as if in a drawing room, Abigail Thomas. I'm sure you're feeling that, right?
Yeah.
Abigail Thomas is going to introduce her more formally in greater length, 20, 30 minutes, at the reading that will follow. That's not true. The reading that will follow at 8. But we want to take this time, as you know, to have some questions and answers from the people who've been reading her, which is all of us who are here. And I know that one class, my own, read Safekeeping, another read Constantly.
That's okay. I probably won't remember.
Well, I think
What comes next? I like it.
Oh, I almost corrected you when you said that. Yeah, no, it's How to Love It. See, so I'm a very good person to have here. To keep things real. Any of the books. And I thought maybe I might start, if that's okay. And Stephanie and I thought we'd ask some questions for about 15 minutes, and then turn the question asking over entirely to you, people. But maybe I was thinking about a phrase that is often in my head, that is Philip Lopez's great phrase to describe fiction, which he describes as the groaning contrivance of fiction. And one feels like from writing fiction, one feels like one knows what that means. But I was wondering about you, like when you moved, if it felt like a move, I don't know if that language is accurate, to the writing of nonfiction, starting with Safekeeping. What did you see nonfiction as giving you, and how did you feel about this nonfiction thing? And I guess, were there things in nonfiction, in the form of nonfiction, that appealed to you as being things that you wanted to do and could not do in fiction?
Well, I didn't want to do it in fiction. It was the event that inspired whatever it was I was doing was the death of my second husband, who had become a very close friend of mine. And it was, as I think I said in Safekeeping, as though the past just drifted, the whole continent drifted away. I saw no point in doing it in fiction because what was coming out of me, although I didn't know what they were a whole bunch of moments and a whole bunch of memories and things that had been part of our life and part of my life before. And I never in fiction. I'm not that much a master of fiction. I'm good at, I have very bad memory, but I remember what I remember very clearly. And that was really the only way I could do it. I hate chronology. I don't even really believe in chronology. Because look at how weird life is. But it wasn't a decision. It was just simply what came out. I didn't think of that. I wouldn't have been able to write it as fiction.
I think I was wondering less about whether one might have written it as fiction, but rather what did one feel in now turning to nonfiction? That is, were there new prospects and new possibilities for you that felt exciting?
Yeah, it was wonderful, especially since whatever I was doing, whatever story I was telling, which I didn't know what it was told in pieces, and I didn't have to connect them yet. I didn't have to have that dreadful narrative arc.
Said so bitterly.
Well, I do say it bitterly. I don't even like the word narrative. I don't think we live that kind of life. But anyway, yes, I loved writing it. I loved writing. It was very free. And so new and odd. And so mysterious. Where was this all coming from?
Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm curious about the word odd.
Well, it was such an odd experience to have this stuff coming out of me like popcorn. And it all seemed to matter. You know, it all was part of something else that I hadn't yet had any notion of what it. This is very bad grammar. I had no idea what I was doing. But I just kept doing. Thank you.
I don't even know that you really need this because I have such a big loud voice, but Lauren, can you hear me back there?
I can hear you.
And do you need it for the video? Do you need it? You need it. Okay.
So I read all of these this summer in a great sort of gorgeous binge, and it was wonderful to read all three of them together. And I keep thinking about voice there's a sort of peripatetic quality to the voice, right? And I'm thinking, I guess, of safekeeping just as a start, because you're allowing yourself to go to so many different places. And yet, there is a real coherence to it, and even a coherence book to book. And I'm wondering how you thought about the voice, how much attention you gave to it.
I don't ever really think very much.
Oh, no.
The voice is just the voice. I mean, it's the way I write. Wait, there was something else I was going to say, but now I've forgotten. What was the other part of your question?
Well, I guess about, that it's both peripatetic and it moves all over, and yet there's a coherence to it, a sound to it, and that even feels continuous book to book.
Oh, thank you. The hardest part of all of these books was, well, the writing, but also the putting it together, because I had all these sort of patches of what went where, and I think in safekeeping you could probably transpose pieces from one section to another and it would still work. The thing about the voice in safekeeping is that I did think about it. I did think about changing from first person to third person to second person. And I think it was because there were things I could say in the third person, which had I said them in the first, would have made me look either like an angel or a victim, neither of which I am or want to be mistaken for. So there were those decisions to make. Some of them came out third or first without any thought, but then there were others that I thought, I can't say this in the first person. I sound too whatever I didn't want to sound. But the other two books are just first person. My editor for safekeeping, as I said in class today, turned it down and wanted me to write a novel about this experience, which was completely out of the question.
Did she see it as field notes?
She just didn't like it. I believe she said, I just don't want to know these things about Abby. But I couldn't write enough. The only novel I wrote was A Big Accident. I don't have that kind of span of attention. And I bore myself to death unless it's short. And then, as I said earlier in class, when I first finished safekeeping, I wanted to call it short, controlled bursts because of, and I thought that's what I'm doing. I'm aiming for a certain moment, and once I hit it, I'm moving on. But they didn't like the title.
Well, the end of safekeeping speaks about that really pretty directly, about how much a moment can hold.
Oh yeah, I had originally thought that safekeeping would end with my husband Quinn's death, and I realized that I wasn't dead. And then this thing happened between my daughter, my estranged daughter, and her daughter and me. And that was where I knew I wanted to end the book, even though I had nowhere near enough book. But once I knew that was where I wanted to get to, then you can find, as you all know, where the holes are and what needs to be, how to earn that ending instead of, anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
And so was there a moment when you knew you were writing this as a book?
Yeah, but it was a long time coming. I think I had 98 pages, and I had shown it to my agent, who was also my best friend, Chuck, and he said, yeah, just keep going, this is interesting. And so with that encouragement, I did keep going. And one thing, as we all know, one memory often leads to another, as does being in precisely the moment you're in now. It's very long routes. So if you're aware of where you are at any given time in whatever kind of way they talk about, it takes you somewhere else too. So it's, oh my God, I hope it's not mindfulness. But every moment has roots, long roots, and it's nice to try and be aware of what that's reminding you of. I always say when somebody can't remember anything and they're a woman of my age, and you're all too young, open a jar of Noxema, and you're 16 years old and you're on the beach, and that will take. Smells are particularly evocative. Music too, of course. I don't think I'm answering any questions.
I think so. I want to ask you more. And then maybe we should open it up. Which is, Monday night in the nonfiction workshop, we were looking at specifically, so that I guess you'd say not the cause, but the nature of a number of the juxtapositions. And we noticed how various they were. Like there are whole sections, which is a long run of narrative, different sections, or sections that do the same minute, but for a different point of view, or the points of view are like this, or something like that. So we keep repeating there. But I get in looking at the really numerous ways in which you do that, or so it seemed. I wonder, when you were putting it together, how were you seeing what you were doing in relationship to making juxtapositions?
Well, I think the thing that helped the most was to think of it as something in 3 sections. And there was the sort of before I knew you, which included knowing Quinn. Then there was the dying, the mortality section, which included a little bit of everything. And then there was the end of it where I looked back more on my life and dwelt on my kids and knew where I wanted to go. That was, the hardest part really was just putting everything on the floor and figuring out what went where. I did that with Helen. I did that with Chuck helping me with. My sister Judy is such a big part of this book that I really, because she's so goddamn funny, and she holds your feet to the fire. That was the hardest part. The hardest part was figuring out what went where. I knew where I was starting. It was almost like swimming underwater to figure out what the middle section was going to be, except it was going to be Quinn's death. And then the rest of it.
So
It's hard. You all know that.
Well, I think those who put a book of poems together know this exact thing. It sounds like the process beyond the 3-part structure is very much a poetry collection process.
Yeah. 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 Oh God, I know how to do that.
Same way you did, right? Put it on the floor.
This looks good here.
Shall we open up?
Sure. Nobody has any bourbon, do they? Do you? I was just kidding.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Okay. Hi. I'm Hannah.
Hi.
You just said something about when you knew where you wanted to end, that sort of helped you figure out where the holes were in looking at that. And I guess that relates to the manuscript on the floor, figuring out where things go. Just interested, were there anything, parts that you wrote during this whole process of dealing with the death that you eventually left out of the final product?
No, nothing. There were certainly things I left out. There were a lot of things I left out, but that was because they weren't any good, or they were repeating something. And I didn't know when I started where I was going to end. I think if you're doing memoir, I've said this too many times today, but if you're writing memoir and you end up where you thought you were going to end up, you're doing something wrong. thing. You haven't dug down deep enough or discovered the awful thing about yourself you wish you didn't know. And that's really, it took me, thank you. It took a while to figure out where I wanted to end with all these books. Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
You're welcome. You sure? Yes. Yeah.
So I read all three of those books also quickly because I just felt like I was inhaling them. I love them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you feel or do you feel like when you're writing, it's all sort of coming from the same source and trying to figure the same thing out? Or do you feel like they're different with each book?
Well, safekeeping was such a strange process that I'm not sure I can, what I wound up knowing about safekeeping, and I think what's true about most memoirs is that very often it is prompted by loss. And what I'm looking for is clarity. I'm looking for clarity. I'm also looking for a way to give meaning to something that has absolutely no meaning. Things do not happen for a reason. But you can make something matter. You can write about your husband's brain injury and find people for whom that's extremely helpful. Not to mention how helpful it was for me. But it really, all writing we do for ourselves, you know, and you can't worry about who's going to not like what, or just got to put it all in there. But it's clarity. What am I feeling, and why do I feel so uncomfortable about what I think I'm feeling? And it's because you're not feeling that, or feeling something else. I had this long piece about not feeling guilty. And I sent it to a friend because it wasn't working. And he said, Abby, it's because you feel guilty as hell. and then I knew what to do.
If I understand, that's an interesting question of what am I feeling, because that's another place where it's separating from narrative, like what happened. You know, one can feel that, I think, in your books. That's a more pertinent question. The story.
Yeah. That's all I know is, I mean, we all have those moments that you never forget, which may be real or not real, but still, it's made us who we are, what we remember and the way we remember it. It's all we got. Pretty much. Of course, there's chocolate.
Nancy?
Yeah, you mentioned here that you write for yourself, and I think I even read that you say you don't care about the reader at all. Yet, we talked about when we read these pieces, we're not lost. We follow you and we care, and we build to these payoffs. So, when do you start thinking about the reader, and how should you?
Well, I don't think about the reader. I think that when you write memoir, the main rule is to be as truthful as you can be about what you're feeling or what you rather not feel. And that's because otherwise, who are you fooling? who are you hiding from here? So you've got, and I think it helps when you can cop to stuff that you'd really much rather not have be part of who you are, because then everybody else who's done similar or other things feels more comfortable. I remember somebody came up to me after Three Dog Life came out and said, you know, I used to feel, I was so guilty, and now I just feel human. And I think that's what we're after. You know, don't the thing that you're most ashamed of, you have to deal with. The darkest part of the cellar, you gotta go down there. And you find, once you've brought it up to the light, that it's finite. It's finite. It doesn't have the power it has when you're trying to press it down. It's finite. And in the light, it just loses. I mean, it's still hard and painful, but it takes more energy to suppress it than it does to get it up. Anyway, I think that's what people respond to, is that I'm not saying, gosh, I was a good girl and a drug majorette and never slept with anybody or more than, well, never mind. More than one at a time.
Already it's December.
No question.
So you're being as truthful as you possibly be. I mean, it feels as possible, as much as you could be truthful, you were in these books. And you write about your children, and
Not much, though.
not much, but you write about some difficult times, and I wonder, you know, how you have these conversations with people who are going to be in the book, and they might not want to be.
I don't have anybody in the book except my children and my sisters that I show the book to before I get it out there. I very rarely take shots at people because there's really no point.
Yeah. Well, I didn't feel any shots taken, but it just, how does that conversation happen? You know, do you write it and then show them? Or you
No, I
talk-
show them the manuscript.
So you don't talk about it first?
Well, I say, this is what I've written, and I want you to read it before I let it go out there. And I showed it to my son. There's a piece in that was maybe the hardest thing I ever wrote, about truly not being there for him when he really needed it. And I showed that to him. I mean, I showed him the piece, and then I said, you know, a couple of days later, what did you think? And he said, I got to that part and I started crying, didn't read anymore. But that opened up a relationship that's gotten really stronger and better for the past X number of years. It was a way of saying, without saying it, I know where I failed. I failed. And we're good now. That's something else you can do. This is, I mean, it wasn't meant to be, but it's also, it's not explaining anything to my kids. It's not, but in some way, it's an apology, without being an apology. It's just as much as I didn't know anything at all.
If it's an apology, it feels in many ways it's an apology that doesn't feel compelled to make the case.
Thank you. Well, yeah, but that was really remarkable with me and my son. That opened up everything. He's sweet, he's very handsome. He lives in Jamaica Plain and he's single. Although he used to be married with a hellion of a former wife.
Were you going to ask a question?
I did. It was, you said that your structure, once you realize that it's what the books are going to be in 3 sections, then that's where you're able to start organizing and working from there. I'm wondering why 3?
I don't know. I think 3 is a magical number. I think 3 has always been a magical number. I couldn't possibly write 4 unless the 4th was like a page long. It just sounds like it would be way too long. I just think 3 is a magical number. There's, you know, you start off, what is it they say? You walk on 4 legs, and then you walk on 2 legs, and then you walk on 3 legs, and then you're dead. the three legs. That's of course with the cane, unless you're using, you know, a walker with those tennis balls. Which I wouldn't actually. I had a thought, but I've forgotten it. What, would you tell me what your question was about?
Why 3 sections?
Oh, magic.
3 sentences.
Oh, yeah, the 3-word sentences. The 3-word sentences, yeah. That was popped into my head on 110th Street.
It's also the shape. I mean, argument usually is
Triangle
assertion.
is the strongest.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is usually a resolution or attempted resolution or failure of resolution, but there's a force and a counter force.
So they say, is what you're saying that the triangle is the strongest? Because I think it is.
I think the last
Triangle-
person to bring up the triangle with me was Mrs. Schwartz in ninth grade. So I'm feeling really confident about talking about the triangle.
I'm pretty sure that the triangle is, for some reason, the strongest shape you can make. I mean, you can bang on a parallelogram, you can punch through a circle, but the triangle. Are you an isosceles?
So Julie, my question
Oh, what was it? Maybe I could do better.
Well, it's been answered earlier. I had a question about your point of view shifts, and if you had any guiding principles to determine when you use the first person, or the second person, or the third in safekeeping.
Well, the second person was always, I was always addressing Quinn, my husband. And everything that felt, mostly it was the first person that I used, but if it felt funny in the first person, like I was showing off if I used the first person, or if I was poor little me in the first person, then I changed it to the third person. That's really the only thing. And some of them I don't even know why I did, but I do know that there were things that I changed so that, you know, I wasn't goody-goody or devil. It's fun to do, it's fun to play around with. And the nice thing about memoirs is that there are absolutely no rules. You do any goddamn thing you want. I think somebody wrote a memoir that is composed entirely of lists, which would be beyond me. But there's that wonderful book, Love, Loss, and What I Wore by Eileen Beckman. Blank faces. A book of poems, you know, Marie Howe. Those poems are memoir. Lots, I mean, it's just no rules. Just what works, works.
So I'm wondering how you've come to know yourself differently through the process of writing. In other words, have you come to understand yourself differently at the end of the memoirs?
I certainly understand myself, yes, in each one. What I hadn't realized before I started writing What Comes Next and how to like it was how angry I actually was. And that came to light, and that was extremely helpful. And other things too, you know, you can't help it. If you're writing about something, especially loss or anything that matters greatly to you, you're gonna change, or you're gonna acknowledge and realize things that maybe make you uncomfortable. But then, my God, once I realized I was furious with my daughter, we were able to have the conversation that straightened everything out, and we were mother and daughter again. It was such a complicated time. Angry with Chuck. I was angry with Chuck too. But hey, love's love. It just can be a little complicated. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
There's a line at the towards the end of safekeeping where something about like deciding that this is happiness, and I was thinking about that, you know, sort of at the end of reading and looking back at what the collection of moments was saying, and it seemed to me that maybe that suggestion was sort of the realization that it's not like an achievable, like, oh, I picked the happiness apple now, but more about being okay with holding up these moments of life, which are often these sad moments or these moments of loss, but that realizing maybe that you know, deciding its happiness is more about saying, okay, like this is my life, like this collection of things is, and trying to figure those things out is what happiness is, instead of this achievable kind of
Right.
tangible thing.
Right. Yes.
Does so it was more of a statement, but yes.
No, but we've turned happiness into a commodity. It's a new lipstick or a new house or a really pretty, and happiness began just HAPPE, which just meant luck, good luck or bad luck. And now we turned it into something we can buy. Boy, have we fucked ourselves. So,
Well, beautifully rendered.
thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Sorry for all the swearing. I won't do it at the reading.
Hi, I'm Katie. So you mentioned, and I know memoirs a lot about looking back and remembering about what happened, but I think it's in Three Dog Life where you mentioned that you don't like people who can remember back further than you can, or who remember better than you can.
I don't like people who remember things I love better than I can remember them.
Right. Yeah, I noticed that your memoirs have a lot to do with your adult life. And I was wondering where you decided to start writing about.
Where I
Like
decided,
would you make a decision not to write about your childhood or your teenage life?
it actually no longer interested me. When I got married the first time, I got married because I was pregnant and I was 18 and the guy I married was 19. It was a very unhappy marriage with all kinds of abuse. When I left, I was no longer that girl. I can't write about that girl. I can't put that in anything. Once you've said the word abuse and you're writing about a marriage, that's the whole, and everything falls through it. So I made a decision not to do that. My childhood was, we moved a lot. I've written a lot of poems about my childhood, but I really only write about what I remember clearly. And I do remember buying blue popsicles in New Orleans. But there are choices I make. For instance, a Three-Dog Life, which is about Rich, was written at exactly the same time that this affair was going on. But it didn't belong in a Three-Dog Life. It would have been too messy, too confusing, and it was not what I was writing about. You have all sorts of things going on all the time, and I needed to focus on this particular thing. Imagine, I wasn't writing the Forsyth saga. And then 7 years later, I found a way to write What Comes Next and How I Like It. You have to pick and choose the story and decide what is the story and what is a different story, which is actually sort of fun.
You said under your breath, God, I hope not mindfulness.
Yeah.
And is that just because it's a word that's
Yes.
so trendy? Okay.
That's
Because you are so present in all these books, and I wondered, have you always been so present, or is that something that came about through your writing?
I think that came about through writing. Because, like many of us, I used to sit around thinking something really good is happening somewhere else and I'm not there. But I don't do that anymore. Whatever's happening is, I'm fine. Just looking at the wallpaper. I don't have any wallpaper, but I would be fine looking at it if I did. I'm very, very good at doing nothing. And there's always something sort of interesting going on. Even being, bored doesn't happen to me very often. I don't know, there's always something to notice fly across your mind until you break your right wrist and then you can't even think, which is actually true. I grew up. I got really grateful for so much. And as we all know, even the really bad, terrible stuff is material. as I told my grandson Sam once. He was talking about something, and I said, Sam, I know it's terrible, but it's all material. Nana, I have enough material, he said. I have enough material.
Already. I love that you write about the affair between your best friend and your daughter in this. And I love it in part because maybe because people don't write about it so much, or I don't even know if that's true as much as it is part of our life. Affairs like this are part of our lives, and yeah, I don't even know if it's silence as much as it is. I don't know. The lie that this isn't part of what our families are. But you said that both of these books there was a loss that came before them. And I'm wondering sort of how you decided to write about that affair, which I imagine a lot of people wouldn't have written about, and whether there was a loss that preceded it, different than these losses.
There are two reasons, because I didn't think it was a possible book to write, and it took 7 years, but my editor, Aunt Patty, said, you gotta write this, you gotta write this. And Chuck, at a point when he was really sick and really depressed, and I said, how can I help you? And he said, write another book. And I said, what book? But he said, make it fiction, because you'll have to lie sooner or later. And I said, this is the book I think it is. And that was what actually really made me do it. He asked me to do it, which put a lot of trust in me. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. But the thing that interests me most about the thing that interests me about this is that there are so many really deep friendships that can be snapped in half by lesser things. And maybe they don't need to be. Maybe you can hang on to something. There's a reason why we were such close friends from the get-go. And it's awfully hard to sort of turn it into trash. And I think we both had the will to try and get back to where we were. And then the irony is that we're closer now than we ever would have been had this never have happened. And we didn't have to lose what we had treasured. And I think that's, if there's any message here, think twice before you cut somebody out whom you've loved and been loved by. There's almost nothing that's unforgivable or livable with. Because I asked Chuck, which is in the book, I asked Chuck, why do I hate the word forgiveness so much? And he said, because it's the ultimate form of passive aggression. Yes. But that's why I love it, because it's so goddamn fun.
I know we should take a break. There's some pizzas in the background that Louis and Chelsea just set up. And I want to give you a little chance to have a break before we go to the reading. So shall we take that break now?
Oh, good idea.
Reconvene today.
Thank you for this.
Thank you very much. Thanks. That's what comes from being in the Army. That's a joke. I want to make a couple of quick announcements first, and then introduce with great pleasure Abigail Thomas. The first announcement is I'm wearing the glasses of Stephanie Grant. Since I broke mine, and I feel very mod, London, 1963. The other announcement I want to make is I want to remind people that Claudia Rankin, the National Book Critics Circle winner in both poetry and in criticism, will be here on campus on November 12th at 7 p.m. in Katzen Recital Hall.
and we're really looking forward to having her here, and we're looking forward to a big audience, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that just serves as a reminder. Back to the ample present, it's really, for me, a really thrilling and also sincere pleasure to introduce Abigail Thomas, a fiction and nonfiction writer whose work I've really long admired, even to the point of wishing it were mine. And sometimes even wish to the form of wishing to copy her in form, given her incredible, amazing talent in devising organic forms that feel both new and necessary as well. She's the author of 3 works of fiction: Getting Over Tom, An Actual Life, and Herb's Pajamas, all of which are published between 95 and 98. And since then, she's the author of 3 highly acclaimed memoirs, Safekeeping, Some True Stories from a Life. I love that, some true stories from a life, that sense of some. You know, the book is not trying to do everything, but that also a life might be rendered through some, and not necessarily through everything. Her second book, excuse me, A Three-Dog Life, which was named one of the best books of 2006 by both the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post, and which Stephen King described as, one would wish this, as Stephen King described as the best memoir I have ever read. Sad, terrifying, and scorchingly honest, a punch in the heart, he said, this book. And then also, most recently, her memoir, What Comes Next and How to Like It, which Anne Lamott has written. This may be the most honest book I've ever read, by one of the most beautiful writers I know. Dizzyingly truthful, often funny, lyrical, and wise. I've actually long hoped for Abigail Thomas to come to campus to the MFA program, not only for the alternately lyrical and straight-up manner of her prose, or the alternately lyrical and straight-up manner of her diction as well, and not simply because she seems to be one of the few prose writers whom I was then reading who managed to write like poets. That is to say, to write associatively, to write prose with a great deal of white space and fragmentation among things, and that and who was able to accomplish a fragmentation that didn't sort of hang out listlessly, and sometimes fragmentation does, I think, but instead that sort of inflects a narrative and end up always being fragments that have add up to be more than the sum of the parts. Like a poem, I think these fragments make full use of white space, of which that which is paused, that which is silent, and they're in some ways gorgeously dependent upon their transitions. In fact, we should listen to those transitions. Excuse me, for taking the reader from here to there, sort of lifting and pulling, and taking the reader from there to here, and just endless surprise in juxtapositions. Time transitions sometimes, but also traditions made from intuition and association, and capturing those things in prose as well. Finally, I've always seen Thomas as capable of providing what Theodore Rutke claimed was the most important way, the path toward empathy, which he described as being something, he said, a tenderness is acquired through long looking. And the people in Thomas's memoirs have been long looked at, and I think this is one of the things that really separates her memoirs from a lot of others, is it's not just the self that's being engaged. In some ways, the self is being scrutinized, perhaps even a bit less sometimes than the others around, who I think scrutinized would not be the right word. It's a tremendously generous vision in Thomas's prose, and it's so often cast onto other people, whatever the circumstances, their difficulties, their abilities to love, all of those things. And in that generosity, and I think, and I mentioned this earlier in another group, I think one of the things I find in her work reminds me of in the early 1980s, I was teaching in Italy, and literary theory had just come to Italy, on the train, and it was making its stops the same way it made its stops in America, and rapidly displacing what used to be the old literature professors, and now we had theory professors. And excuse me, and I had a colleague when I was teaching who was very unhappy about this. He, like I, was not trained in theory. He was trained in the old way of close reading. But his unhappiness was not simply because he lacked a certain kind of training. His unhappiness had to do with what was his basic relationship to literature. And he said, and I feel this way about Abigail Thomas's work really keenly, he said that we didn't read literature in order to theorize it. He said we read literature in order to learn how to live. And I feel this is work that really is how to live. So Abigail would be thrilled to hear you.
Wow.
Cheers, some more.
I have to give you a little kiss.
Wow, I have a little. Go for it, girl.
Thank you.
You don't seem like a person of small things.
That's true. Wow, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you. This is such an honor and such a pleasure it's been. I'm going to start, can you hear me?
Yes.
When I finished writing What Comes Next and How to Like It, I could not write a single word. So I dug back in some dusty old poems and found one I'd written 30, 40 years ago on the eve of my 40th birthday. And who knew how prophetic it would be? I'm just going to read that before I get started. While cleaning the outside of my tub before my 40th birthday, New York City. When I'm old and fat and white, all shoulder, rump, and rib cage, unable to move any more than this tub can, I trust someone will hunch over me with a blue sponge and attend to my surface as I am attending to the streaky outside of this tub, this substantial, curvaceous, unerotic old mother of the tub. And not fuss at me or ask me what my memories are, not expect me to smile or sigh, because I will be beyond all that. I will have earned the right to keep still. Not murmur endearments unless they are part of the job, part of the rhythm of the work. Good old girl, you are a good old girl. And if this sprucing up is ritual, so much the better, since I have always been just surface. Everything I know, I have always known first with my skin. And when company is coming and you want to look your best, battered is noble and worn out and beat up and still able to hold water is honorable. Enough of that. So this is a book about a lot of things. It's about a long friendship and a hole blown through it. But I'm not going to read in any kind of order, which wouldn't do you any good anyway. I'm just going to read. This first thing is stories. I had written poems in the 70s, but the poetry dried up. When I tried to write words that went all the way across the page, I got discouraged. Who do you think you are? I'd mutter, bowling up the paper and tossing it into the wastebasket. You're not a writer. Writers are unusual people. Then one day, somebody told me a story that stuck in my head. I wanted badly to tell it. I was obsessed. For the first time, the story was more important than my ego. And after failing, I tried again, and then again. It was a mother-daughter story, and once I quit trying to write it in the voice of the woman whose story it was, and imagined me the mother and the daughter one of my own daughters, it worked. The story got published in a literary magazine. I wrote another, and it got published too. Well, that's where I'm going to end for that one. This is called Copping to It. What do we use? That's easy. We use everything. We have our eyes and ears open to snag the lovely and the harsh and the hilarious. There's a ruthlessness to all writers. That first story up and grabbed me by the throat, and I was oblivious to the fact that I was stealing. I had no idea I had done anything wrong until I ran into the woman whose story it was. She said she'd seen it in a magazine. She congratulated me. I looked at her face, which was expressionless, and I understood for the first time what I'd done. I was ashamed of myself. I still am. But that story turned me into a writer. Yard sale. Fall, and all my kids were visiting. A guy down the block was selling his dead mother's stuff, and I asked my kids to see if he had any old picture frames with glass or windows, but they came back shaking their heads. Evidently, it was sad over there. All morning, people got out of their cars, looked around swiftly, and drove away. I tried not to think of the detritus of a mother's life laid out on card tables for sale and no takers. I wondered what my kids would do with my collections of anything and everything. I hope they don't feel guilty if nobody wants my barrel staves or my pieces of iron or the run-over windshield wiper, but there's nothing I can do about it. I think about death because death is inevitable, but what else is coming? My mind draws a blank. The words "plan for the future" actually make me laugh out loud. The future is a moving target, completely unpredictable, like the past. I didn't know I never thought about it until I had coffee in the city with a woman who thought about it all the time. She worried that her future had shrunk. She worried that her health, although she looked fine to me, worried about her health, although she looked fine to me. She lay awake at night with these worries. "Don't you?" she asked. I was staring at her beautiful shoes. "No," I answered, wondering if this was a failing. I never think about the future at all. I worry about what would happen if John got sick or I got sick. I wondered how we would manage. I don't worry about my husband. The worst that could happen to him already happened. He was hit by a car in April of 2000 and sustained permanent brain damage. 7 years later, January 1st, 2007, he died. Grief is different from worry. I don't want to remember what it was like before, eating muffins and reading the paper together on the porch. I don't want to remember him planting the wild grasses that he loved, or the way he smiled at me, or his generous heart. I don't want to remember walking down Broadway holding hands. I'm still shocked by what happened. I am used to never getting used to it. But grief overtakes me in the coffee aisle, or sweeping the porch, or smiling at the dogs catching me unaware. Grief is not a pleasure, but it makes me remember, and I'm grateful. The worried woman was only a few years older than I am. Maybe 75 brings with it the gravitas I lack. When we parted, I allowed myself to feel sorry for her, a woman wasting a perfectly good afternoon worrying about something that might never happen. Well, the death part will happen, I reminded myself. But before this line of thought could go any further, I was distracted by a figure clad entirely in gold, walking toward me on 59th Street. I took it all in, the gold hat with a golden feather, the gold jacket and pants, gold boots, golden gloves, a gold lorgnette, and a golden mask that covered his or her entire face. Oh, New York, was all I was thinking. I love you so much. Bad dog. Sadie used to live next door. The man who took care of her couldn't keep her in the yard. She craved freedom, I guess. He put in a stockade fence. She got out. He buried cement blocks under the fence. She got out. He put chicken wire on top of the fence. She got out. He sat on the roof for 3 hours watching to see how she did it. She stayed in. She came trotting over here if I was home. She jumped into my lap if I was sitting outside. She pushed through the dog door if I was inside. She once arrived breathless with 2 inches of chewed-off leash still attached to her collar. How not to love a dog like this? She barked loudly one rainy night, and I found her on the kitchen steps, soaked and shivering. I let her in, dried her off, and she slept with us. It was a lovely night. But she had once been found miles away on the Wittenberg Road barking at somebody's chickens. She'd been seen wandering down Route 212, which is a busy road. I worried about her. Every time her owner picked her up, I worried about the next time she'd escape. What if I was away? I began wondering how I could secretly just keep her, but I couldn't come up with a decent plan. Her owner loved her too and was determined to outfox her. I'll take her, I began suggesting, when I sensed his growing frustration. I have the underground fence and she'll be safe. He shook his head, taking the reluctant little thing home. What if she gets hit by a car, I said, desperate. Well, said this otherwise perfectly nice man, if she gets hit, she gets hit. That's her fate. I grumbled to all my kids. How could anyone say such a thing? But he had been struggling for years to keep her safe. He was getting calls from neighbors, from police, from the ASPCA. It was so clear to me that I should adopt her. Why couldn't he see this? I offered $300 for the little scamp, but he was not going to be bested by a little black dog that weighed maybe 18 pounds. He named her Houdini and took her home time after time. Then one day he called. I could have her. School was starting. He teaches at night, and he couldn't possibly keep running to pick her up wherever she was that wasn't here with me. He said I was probably better for her than the pound, or he had once in exasperation threatened to take her. She was mine? Sadie was mine? I had a moment of elation and terror. What had I gotten myself into? Sadie's been here almost a year. According to her vet record, she is half lab and half boxer. I see no sign of either. She has chewed up 2 sofas, 4 chairs, innumerable socks, and several books. She has destroyed 4 ottomans. Anything left on the floor is hers, including rugs. And I warn visitors not to take off their shoes. She's eaten 3 comforters, once Daphne's specialty. She nips the back legs of whichever dog is in front of her on the way downstairs. She relentlessly teases Daphne, who went from pup to matron almost overnight. When another dog seeks attention, she sidles him or her out of the way. If Daphne gets on my lap, and Daphne is a big girl, Sadie jumps up too, and they find a way to share me as I struggle to breathe. As I read this over, I don't know how I can stand it. If I didn't love this dog so much, she'd be dead. My friend Nona suggested I get her a thunder shirt. This is a comfy, soft jacket that fits the way swaddling clothes fit and is meant to make an anxious dog feel safe. It worked for 2 days. Then I taught an afternoon class, was gone for hours, and came home to find a cushion off a little rose-colored chair in hundreds of pieces. I'm not sure Sadie is an anxious dog exactly. She just doesn't like it when I leave. Maybe, as several people have suggested, she needs Prozac. Maybe she needs a crate, or training, or spring to arrive. Meanwhile, I use a spray bottle of water to stop her when she won't quit bothering Daphne. After a tiring day of destruction, she sits on my lap and puts her forepaws on my chest. Then she stares intently at my face. She licks my nose. Sometimes she snorts directly into my nose, and I get a brief and mysterious high. When we go to bed, she fits herself in the crook of my arm, lays her head on my shoulder, and she sleeps. I have a lot of very bad dogs. This is called Irony. I read On the Road for the first time when I was 68. I should have read it when I was young, because what struck me was how heartbreakingly innocent it was, and how boring. I was puzzled until it hit me that there wasn't any irony in there. Was innocence the opposite of irony? I became obsessed. What is irony? Where did it come from? How did it take over? How do we get rid of it? I asked Chuck if he thought irony was an enhancement of life or a scrim that keeps us at a remove. He said maybe irony is the lens through which we see the picture in reverse. I wrote that down. Sometimes I think one thing, sometimes another. These days, I'm apt to think of irony as a suit of armor. Wit distances us, said Northrop Frye. I have Chuck's copy of Anatomy of Criticism. He gave it to me years ago when I was feeling ignorant, assuring me it was easier than I thought and interesting. I love his notes in the margins. I will never give it back. If he asks, I will say I lost it. I plan a day where I wake up and eschew all ironic casts of thought. I will do everything directly, look everything in the eye, take it at face value, experience one thing at a time. A day without irony. I imagine a new national holiday. This morning I settle on the porch looking out at the yard, the mountain beyond, absorbing yellow leaves and blue sky and green grass. The moment extends itself. The radio is on in the next room providing white noise. I have the dogs with me, and I'm doing very well until 8 words distinguish themselves from all others on the radio. 100 strands of hair from Che Guevara. It turns out his hair is being auctioned off. His hair. Not only was the man executed, but years later his hair is being sold by capitalist pigs. I assume they are capitalists. Perhaps not pigs. Maybe they're putting their children through school. I have various unformed thoughts about irony, thoughts that have not reached what I think of as the softball stage, using a metaphor from cooking fudge. To continue the cooking metaphor, I've had the epiphany, which may be nothing more than having reinvented the wheel, that equal parts of innocence, shaken up with equal parts of experience, like salad dressing, make, no matter how hard you resist it, irony, if the bubbles of innocence separate after a while from those of experience. But if they mix completely, we probably wind up with cynicism. But wait, what about wisdom? Wisdom, I decide, looking at those yellow leaves, lies in the decision to mix up a fresh batch every morning. Daphne, my newest dog, there are a lot of dogs. Daphne, my newest dog, ducks under the covers and makes her way to the end of the bed. She places her forelegs over my ankles, then lays her head on my feet. She licks me for a while, which provides a surprisingly pleasant sensation, then falls asleep. From time to time, I can feel her delicate swallow. Now and then her legs pump, and I know she's running after something in the backyard. Sometimes she just moves her jaws with none of the muffled barking the other 2 dogs do, an hilarious sound, barking with mouth closed. But I'm pretty sure Daphne is dreaming of eating or chewing. The lawn is littered with items stolen from everywhere, rolls of paper towels, mutilated and scattered, loaves of raisin bread, only the wrappers remaining, an entire box of black and white cookies, the brisket I had wrapped up for my daughter, the only part of which remained when I turned my back for 2 minutes, being the tinfoil. Daphne has stolen all the books from the bottom shelf, writers whose last names begin with E. I have found Jeffrey Eugenides, George Eliot, Alice Thomas Ellis, Clive Edgerton, Deborah Eisenberg, all lying on the lawn with their bindings chewed. The red comforter has been reduced to fluff. The green coverlet is now lace. I don't dare put anything pretty on my bed lest it be turned to ribbons, so I sleep under rags. I don't care. I love her. Yesterday, I caught her just in time scooting through the dog door with my daughter Catherine's baseball cap, the one with the bronze wig attached. Catherine has cancer. She has other wigs, but this is her favorite. She found a lump in her breast, summer of 2011. She went to the doctor and had a biopsy. A week went by. The results were supposed to come on Monday, and Catherine drove to my house to wait for the call. When her phone rang, she stiffened. "It's them," she said, and listened for a moment before she turned away, her shoulders shaking. "Is this a death sentence?" I heard her whisper, weeping. I put my arms around her. Catherine makes no sound when she weeps, but her body heaves and trembles. It would be all right, I told her. It would be all right. But my body was ice cold. I called her sisters and her brother, who had one question. Will she be all right? Of course, I think I said. Of course she will. Then I called Chuck. It's cancer, I told him. God, no, he said. I'm terrified, I said. Catherine's cancer is triple negative, which means there is no standard treatment. I'm going to try and look on this as an adventure, Mom, she said, and my heart broke for her innocence and courage. Triple negative means that Catherine's cancer cells don't have receptors for estrogen, progesterone, or HER2. As a result, her cancer cells don't respond to therapies that block estrogen, progesterone, or HER2. There's no protocol. Furthermore, because there are no effective treatments, this cancer is extremely aggressive. Likely to recur, said a hospital pamphlet in a doctor's waiting room. Afraid that Catherine might read this terrifying phrase, why could they not have said more likely to recur? I stuffed the damn thing in my bag to toss, but it sticks to me. Not long after Catherine's diagnosis, my grandson Joe is here nursing a broken heart. He's the oldest of Sarah's 5 kids. Usually I'm a good listener. Usually I'm sympathetic to a broken heart. I love this young man, and he's clearly bewildered, even stunned by the pain. We're sitting outside on the uncomfortable wire chairs I bought years ago, and he tells us that his girlfriend left him. Now she won't answer his calls. She gives no explanation for the breakup. He looks to me for advice, for reassurance, for sympathy. I look back at him with God knows what expression on my face. There's a brief silence. It's not cancer, I say. Mom, says Catherine later. She's shocked. That was really harsh. I don't care. I have no sympathy for ordinary grief. Where am I? I have no dread. I have no use for the future, and it has little use for me. I exist in the present, but I live in dread, whose roots are in the future. Dread owes its very existence to the future. What can come, my grandson Sam asked, when he was very young, after his mother had warned him not to go into the woods after dark. What can come? This was a brilliant question. Can is scarier than will. What will come limits itself. What can come has no boundaries. Our family has repeated this question for years, laughing. Dread can be all-purpose, or it can roost on a specific branch. I know my daughter is cancer-free now at this moment, and that this moment is it. But I admit dread has taken up residence. My daughter has been free of cancer for a year, but I'm still afraid of what can come. Drinking and thinking. There are 3 things that make me want to drink. Difficult times, when I want alcohol to either alleviate the pain or allow me to feel it. Clear days that make me want to scribble all over the irritating blue sky. And, well, waking up in the morning. I'm an alcoholic. I've quit before, but always started up again, usually in the kitchen. I'd find myself pouring half a bottle of red wine into tomato sauce, and testing for flavor, using a ladle and scooping up only the wine part. Then pouring the rest of the bottle in and testing again. This gave me the tiniest buzz, and of course it wasn't really drinking. But brownies were my downfall. You have to put vanilla in brownies or there's no point. And I've always scoffed at recipes that call for a measly teaspoon. A teaspoon? I'd pour half a bottle into the mixture, then taste. Soon I was drinking it straight out of the bottle. Vanilla is delicious, and it's also 35% alcohol. Good old, lowly old vanilla. I became a vanilla connoisseur. It started with McCormick, which is too sweet. Moved on to Durkee, which has a bitter finish. Attempted Goya, which was surprisingly bland. Then discovered Madagascar bourbon vanilla. Now here was a really robust vanilla, and it was organic. I began going to different grocery stores, imagining the clerks whispering to each other, "Didn't you just buy 4 bottles of vanilla yesterday?" I alternated between the West Side Market, the University Market, and whatever is now Agristides. I discovered the 86th Street Williams-Sonoma and traveled across town to buy a dozen bottles at once, 12 ounces, murmuring something about getting my Christmas shopping done early. Then slinking out the door, hailing a taxi, sliding down in the seat, unscrewing the cap off a bottle, and lugging it all the way home. Vanilla isn't drinking, I told myself. If you can't order it in a bar, it isn't drinking. The fact that you can get hammered on a bottle of vanilla meant nothing. I love to drink. I love the taste. Wherever I've lived, I've found the place that makes the best Manhattans. Up here, it's Cucina. I love the dappled place I find myself after 1 drink, and even 2. But after 3, I'm getting lost in the woods. After 4, I'm climbing back onto the bar stool I've just fallen off. After that, I stagger to the car to be driven home by Chuck. The point is that after 1 drink, there's no stopping. I decided 1 beer a day would be okay, as long as I could keep it to 1 beer a day. I went to the Cub every afternoon, bought my 1 bottle of Rochefort 10 and a pack of Camels. All was going smoothly until the week I was invited out for dinner 4 nights in a row. Out for dinner was always a different story, like being on a plane where calories don't count. Not that there's anything to eat on a plane anymore, but you know what I mean. So there I was at Cucina, ordering a Manhattan, and then another, and often another, then 3 glasses of wine with dinner, and for dessert, an Irish coffee, Irish on the side, wink, wink. And I was plastered 4 nights in a row. On the 5th morning, I woke not so much with a hangover, as with an appalling feeling of guilt and shame and fear. For no reason. I didn't attack anyone. I didn't take my clothes off or hurl abuse. I behaved very nicely, except for a little spilling and possibly leaning too close to Chuck. But he knows me drunk and finds a way to tolerate it. I was beside myself. I'm 71, I stormed around the house shouting. Why can't I drink? So I sent an urgent email to my friend Kitty, asking her to please call me, and within 5 minutes she was on the phone. I love Kitty. I am so angry, I said. I'm 71 years old. Why can't I have a few drinks? Why do I feel so guilty and afraid and full of dread in the morning? I behaved myself. Why do I feel this horrible guilt? I was furious, but it was Kitty I called. Kitty, who has been sober for 11 years and counting. Kitty, who has a sense of humor, whose advice might go my way. Go ahead, she might have said, or so I thought, but she didn't. I feel so guilty in the morning, I whined. Well, she said slowly, maybe you ought to take a look at that. And so at long last I did. The other times I'd quit had been different. I remember standing on the island at 112th and Broadway 30 years ago, a bag of groceries in my arms, waiting for the light to change. It was the day after a 12th night office party where I had hit my head against a hanging plant and pinned someone to the wall, explaining rather aggressively how to cook rice. Then later leaned against the front door, making out with the host while his wife and everyone else looked on. Gee, I thought, I don't really want to do that again. And quit before the light turned green. But now at 71, I finally had to think about it. I do not want to feel this way, especially from something I'm doing to myself. So I've stopped thoughtfully this time, weighing the morning against the dubious pleasure of the night before. And so far, the morning is winning. It lost, actually, after a while. Sorry, I'm looking at some, oh well, here's one. So what to do? I'm watching DVDs of a program called Supernatural. I learned about it at Catherine's one cold gray morning when I stopped for a visit. She was lying on the couch with her 2 ancient cats, watching this terrible thing about demons and werewolves and shapeshifters, a whole world infested with vicious beings after the hell mouth was opened by accident. How can you watch this? I asked, settling down next to her, gluing myself to the screen. It's terrible. It's everything you hate in a movie. Catherine long ago announced her aversion to movies that were dark and wet. This is dark and wet, very dark, very wet. Everything is dripping with ectoplasm or sodden with blood. It's good, she says, not taking her eyes off the television. It's 10 in the morning. Granted, outside it's a nasty, depressing, cold day. Television at this hour? I'm shocked. I stay for 3 episodes. I've got to get out of here, I say, standing up resolutely. I can't get hooked on this stuff, and it's very upsetting. She nods and smiles, continuing to watch. Oh, stay for 1 more episode, she says. I went home, and 2 days later bought all 7 seasons of it. And the 8th is on order. Like drinking, I start watching earlier and earlier. I'm learning all sorts of useful things for when the apocalypse arrives. I learned you have to put salt under windowsills and doorways to keep the demons out. I learned what instrument kills what evil being. Some need their heads chopped off with an iron axe. Some need to be burned alive. Some need silver bullets or wooden stakes. 2 very good-looking brothers have teamed up to fight the powers of evil, but they have issues with each other. At first, Catherine's favorite was Dean, the older brother, and I liked Sam. Now it's the other way around. I have memorized the license plate of their old Chevy Impala and plan to use it as my password. It's easy to find that 5 or 6 hours have sped by without my noticing. I am having fun. This is not my world. These are not my fears. Supernatural is great storytelling, but it's not my story. Oh, it's such a good show. Sorry, I'm looking for something. I hate chronological order. Not only do I have zero memory for what happened when in what year, but it is so boring. This comes out of me with the kind of vehemence that requires a closer look. So I scribble on the back of the napkin while waiting for friends to show up at Cucina, and it doesn't take long to figure it out. The thought that this happened, and then this happened, and then this, and this, and this, the relentless march of event and emotion tied together simply because day follows day and turns into week following week, becoming months and years, reinforces the fact that the only logical ending for chronological order is death. This is, I took the training to be a hospice volunteer. The training, 12 of us sit around a big table. We're given a bad diagnosis and 12 squares of paper. On the first 3, we are to write the names of 3 people dear to us. On the next 3, things we cherish. On the next 3, stuff we enjoy. On the last 3, things about ourselves we value. We spread the squares in front of us neatly on the table. Then we are given 6 months to live. The instructor describes the disease's progress month by month. As each month passes and our condition worsens, We must tear up 2 pieces of paper. The instructor comes around the table and collects the torn pieces in a shopping bag. By the end of the 6 months, when we are too weak to sit up, too weak to eat, when we have lost so much weight that our clothes hang off our bodies, we each have 2 pieces of paper left. The instructor comes around the table, and from us she takes one of the last 2 pieces, tears it up, and drops it in her shopping bag. The room is quiet. We are each left with 1 piece of paper. Then she tells us to tear that up too. Oh, I'm looking for something specific, and I don't know where it is. Oh, I'm going to read. I think I'm just about done, but let me just page 208 to see if anybody here has ever felt this way. Page 208. Too much. Yesterday, May 1st, there was too much green and pink and yellow. There was no escaping the loveliness, the delicacy. Beauty assaulted me on every front. For Cynthia, like a breaking wave, no, a tsunami of yellow. The old magnolia exploding into pink and white like grenades. Blue sky. There was no escape from all this beauty. I was being force-fed a spring morning. Even the oxygen was divine. So I finally went inside and watched The Exorcist. I really did. I don't lie. Okay. Do you think I'm about finished? I'm just going to read one more. Okay, it's called Time. I think about time differently since I got to be this old. I think of each moment as a big lazy boy, or perhaps a hammock, and the only direction is a little back and forth or side to side. For this I need peace and quiet, and I eschew all outside stimulation. Perhaps this is why the future escapes me. I love my 12 grandchildren, but they function, as do their parents, on linear time. When they visit, I mobilize. I bake my cookies. I bake ginger snaps and chocolate chips and cornmeal sugar cookies and shortbread. I bake big, chewy chocolate cookies. I give everyone 2 at a time. Why not? You only live once. I notice that with small children, everything is a beeline to the next thing. No time for lolling about, which is what I do best. I call myself a writer, but I'm stone lazy. I appreciate that the advantage of getting old is you don't want to mess around anymore. In order not to want what I don't really want, I'm careful about the movies I watch, and I play music only in the car. When I watch a movie, I don't want to cry or be moved or enlightened, and I don't want to be turned on. I saw the one about Woodstock, and it took me almost 2 years to get over Viggo Mortensen. I bought the DVD because I loved it so much, but I've never opened it. It has sat on the shelf for 4 years. I like movies with good guys and bad guys and a lot of big guns. I do not want anything stirred up that I can't handle by myself. When the twins came over Christmas, I baked cookies and roasted sweet potatoes and chickens and simmered my stews. I loved it when the babies climbed into my lap. After a week of 2 sets of two-year-old twins having a really good time, I decided it was time to leave the house. Time to flee, were my exact words to myself. I realized that my gynecologist had died 15 years ago and thought it prudent to find a new one right now this minute, and so I did. I made an appointment with a nice woman doctor. See you later, I said to my family, and drove away. I thought I'd be safe at the gynecologist's. The nice doctor examined me inside and out and then called me into her office. The doctor sat behind a desk. It was a pleasant room with water trickling over stones and a plug-in fountain. She needed to ask a few questions. I nodded.
Have you had more than one sexual partner? The doctor asked. Outside, sun was shining on the snow. This was not the question I was expecting. Yes, I said. Land sakes, yes. More than 5? Quite a few more, I said, as modestly as I could. I didn't want to appear to be bragging, so I added by way of explanation, it was the 60s. Have you ever had a sexually transmitted disease, was the next question. It seemed a little nosy, but I answered truthfully. Yes, I said. But now I was remembering how I got it and who I gave it to. And it was Washington Square, and I was young and slender and barefoot, and it was 1968 all over again. Damn, I thought. It turned out that Medicare will pay for certain yearly exams if you have had more than 5 sexual partners. Who knew? But now, instead of being safe and sound and insulated against desire's shudder, I was suddenly thinking other kinds of thoughts, having other kinds of memories. I went and bought Guitar Town by Steve Earle instead of listening to my better self, and I even played it indoors because when I got home, the kids were out. After a bit, and despite my new relationship with time, I began to experience impatience. One song at a time was taking too long. I began to wonder if there weren't some way I could cram all this music in at once. Oh hell, that's called fucking. I think that's it.
Abigail, thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
My pleasure. There are books by Abigail Thomas for sale in the back of the room. If you'd like to chat with her, or she's recently got her cast off.
Yes.
Or get them signed, question mark?
It isn't going to be a good sign.
Please feel free. And again, thank you.
Thank you
for being
very
here.
much, everybody, and thank you so much for